Well, welcome to the Sales Code Leadership Podcast with Kevin Teeler and my guest this week, Andy Champion. Andy, how are you today?
I'm fantastic, Kevin. Love to see you.
Oh, absolutely. You too. The wonders of the internet, something that didn't exist when you and I started selling.
Yeah, tell me about it. It's funny. I wonder where we would have been over the last 3 to 5 years without applications like Zoom and Teams to stay connected with each other, with our colleagues, and with our customers.
Great, isn't it? I think it's all turning out like Star Trek myself. That was my favorite TV show when I was a kid.
Star Trek, Doctor Who. You're aging us now, Kevin.
Well, we'll see how we get on, if we can give any more secrets away as we go along the call about age and the rest of it. But we won't pry too much into that space. So listen, Andy, thank you for joining us today. Could you tell me, what is it you get paid to do now?
So, simplistically, I'm paid to maximize the revenues that HighSpot gets from its international business. So all of the work that we do outside of North America, across Europe, Middle East, Africa, and ANZ, we've got about 100 and just over 130 people. And of course, as a business, what we're looking to do is to change the way that millions of people work through technology. We talked about technology just now. I'm sure we'll talk about it as we go through today's conversation. But what HighSpot does specifically is we look at sales productivity, and we help salespeople and their leadership maximize quota attainment, maximize, I like to think about it, those precious few moments that we have in front of the customer. And it's how do we help people, equip, train, and coach people to deliver in those precious few moments to maximize the impact of those conversations, and hopefully ultimately drive revenue for their business, and for them as individuals, help them get to their quota. That's kind of what we do.
Is that coaching effectively?
Coaching is part of it. But of course, in order to coach somebody on something, you've first got to equip them with the content, with the information they need. You then need to train them on the skills and knowledge, and that's both knowledge around their product, their competitors, the value that they drive, but also traditional sales skills, right? Equipping people with the ability to negotiate effectively. We joked before about technology and what would we do without it. We're working with a generation of people, salespeople, particularly those that are in their career, that have grown up in the world where everything's done on Zoom. And I think one of the opportunities we've got is to perhaps call out that sometimes there are alternative methods of having meetings and conversations, which might involve being in person with someone. So
we can't do that. We can't go and see people, can we? Can we go and see people?
Hell yes. Absolutely. But it's a forgotten art, right? And so no, what do? I lead the business outside of North America. I'm paid to maximize the results. And the way we do that is to help organizations lift the performance of their sales teams, driving better quota attainment across the board. That is what we do.
I want to come back to coaching later in the conversation, because the main topic we said we wanted to talk about today is land and expand, which we'll come on to in a second. But before we get there, I'm really interested in how you arrived at the position that you're currently in. Was this the career that you had in mind at 16?
No. And I'm 54 now, and I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do when I grow up. But no, at 16, where was it? 16. So at 16, I was still trying to figure out the world, life, and everything. I think when I moved into the lower six, so around when I turned 17, I decided that what I wanted to do was to go and join the army. So I spent the first 6 years of my post-university career as an officer in the British Army. I went to Sandhurst. I met the late Queen, which was phenomenal. Such an incredible leader, an incredible lady, inspiration to us all. And then I served the first 3 years of that in Northern Ireland before the peace, which I think the reason I mention that, Kevin, is it taught me a lot about leadership. that I still draw on to this day. Now, of course, the military is very different from civilian career, but I think there are some principles within leadership that the army helped reinforce or helped teach me that I've taken and have been the backbone of how I've tried to approach leadership. And one of the core principles of that is not asking the people around me to do anything that I'm not prepared to do myself. It's about, rolling your sleeves up, being prepared to put in the hard graft and the hard hours, and making sure that people understand that you're in it with them. None of this, do as I say, not as I do. You've got to walk the line as a leader these days. And arguably, I think you have had to do that. For certainly the best leaders lead through example, and they lead through adversity. And the army helped reinforce that for me.
How did you come to meet the Queen, the late Queen, I should say?
Well, I was very lucky. I was at Sandhurst for 7 months, and at the end of the first sort of 3 months or so, first term, there was a passing out parade with the cohort above me passed out, when we had the late Lady Di, Princess of Wales, as she was at that time, and she was the inspecting officer. And I remember to this day that I had a bottle of port bet on this with a guy next to me. You all stood there in rank, stood to attention, and I bet a bottle of port with him that Princess Diana would talk to me, and him vice versa. Interestingly, it was so hot and humid that about partway through the parade, he almost fell over, and the two of us either side basically leant in shoulder to shoulder and kept up. And then,
that's
of course,
teamwork, Andy. That is teamwork.
Yeah,
properly propping up your mate. I love it.
But that literally, figuratively, and literally in this case. And then, yes, he won the bottle of port because she talked to him, not me. But Her Majesty the Queen, the late Queen, did my passing out parade in April of the following year, and we also had new colours presented to Sandhurst at the time as well. So it was a phenomenal experience. A lady with great dignity, with great courage, and I think when you look at how she led and through some of the periods that she led as a female leader, she was quite a rarity, and yet she had to sort of navigate her way through many complexities. And sure she didn't get every decision right, but I think she was a phenomenal inspiration for many people, especially many of our female colleagues, in terms of how one might wish to carry yourself in a sadly still a male-dominated world.
Very true. Very true. And what about after the forces then? What was your first job in Civvy Street? Is that a word people use in the army? Or?
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit outdated now. I don't know.
Oh dear. Showing my age this time.
I'm almost 30 years out of the military. I left in September 96, so it's going back a while. But my first job was working for a sales recruitment company, and my job, my metric, I remember to this day, was making 100 dials a day, and we didn't have technology back then. We literally didn't have technology. We didn't have emails. We didn't have the internet. Didn't really exist. Makes me sound like some sort of dinosaur, but it really didn't. We had big business directories called the Compass Directory, a little bit like Yellow Pages, but for businesses. And then on Thursday morning, all the local papers had a career section with all the jobs. And I figured out if I got into the office first, I could get access to those all of those ads and put the calls in before anybody else did. Anybody else in my office, but also anybody else, in the other recruitment firms. And so I did that for 9 months, and it was hard. It was literally phoning up sales directors, CEOs in the local area, asking them if they had any vacancies for salespeople, and then trying to persuade them to see some of our candidates. And then as soon as they said yes, I passed it off to a colleague who then had done the candidate work and took it from there. So I literally was in that front line driving the demand, and calling from the start and getting all sorts of answers. But it was great discipline, very humbling, to come out. 6 years. I left the army as a captain, and then to be there. There is your desk. There is your phone. You will make $100 a day, and literally no onboarding at the time, no coaching at the time, other than have you hit your number yet? Have you hit your number yet? So it was quite a change. Quite a change.
What about tech sales? How did that happen?
I found myself my first sales role, which was in the fitness industry. I've always been very sporting. My degree is human biology, and then from there, around the turn of the century, I decided actually that this thing called the internet was coming along. It looked pretty exciting. Some of the friends that I knew were in technology sales. And I figured that it would be a great place to move. And I went across, got myself a job with GB Group, GBG, based in Chester. Funnily enough, I went and did a Women in Tech Forum panel at their London office about 6 months ago. And so it was nice, kind of full circle to go back. And then really the rest is history. I spent 15 years or so in marketing technology, working for various different companies, and then moved into sales technology recently. Most of my career has been probably 20 years or so working typically for US companies who are looking to bring their products, their offering into Europe, typically via the UK, and then figure out what markets they expand into from there. So yeah, GBG was my first tech role, and then worked my way up through sales technology, marketing technology over the last 20 or so years.
Do you think you can be a really good sales leader if you haven't done all those jobs? Is it possible to lead by example if you haven't worn the boots of the people that work for and with you?
I think that there are a number of things, right, Kevin? I think the first principle is, and this is really important, is that as a leader, your job is not to be the smartest person in the room. And if you follow the logic of that, then potentially you could argue, oh, no, you don't need to do it. You could bring anybody in. But having said that you don't need to be the smartest person in the room, you do have to create an environment where people can contribute. That space that is safe, where the psychological safety, where people don't feel they're going to be ridiculed or somehow laughed at for bringing forward an idea that they're, or a question or whatever. So I think it's helpful, and the reason I think it's helpful is it helps with guiding others. If you've done something and experienced something, whether it's selling, whether it's account management, key account management, whether it's being an ADR, I think you have an appreciation of what goes into that work. And then I think that does come to the fore when you create that environment for those people to succeed. You've been there, you've probably got a few scars. I know I've still got scars from picking up the phone and doing those $100 a day, from the phone being put down on me to being told to go away and replicate and, all sorts of things. Right. And so I think there's a level of credibility that is important. Equally, I think the skills as a leader are subtly different from the skills of an individual contributor. And whilst it's helpful, I don't think that necessarily you have to have done it, but I am glad that I did it, because I have a perspective, and when I talk to my salespeople or my ADRs, BDRs, and they're talking to me about what they're going through, I've been there and experienced exactly that. So it gives me an immediate intimacy with the problem that they're dealing with, that I can then hopefully help coach them through. And I think that would be difficult had I not done those roles.
That's part of your secret sauce, the coaching. Again, let's come back to that a bit later, because I think it's a great topic and a really interesting one. But before we get there, we should dive into the meat of what we said we were going to talk about, so we don't disappoint the listener. like me, you have launched a number of software vendors into the UK, haven't you? In my case, 6 different companies, 4 American, 2 European. I love the challenge of being what we used to call the first boots on the ground in a new territory. And I think you do as well. So tell me about what was, your first experience of doing that, why you like doing it, what the challenges are, what the up and down side of it is.
So my first experience was with a company called Responsis. And this was around sort of 2007, 2008 time, if I remember rightly. And Responsis was in the MarTech arena. And what we did was email. But at the time, the way email worked then, very different to how it works now, is everybody basically got the same email, the same content sent at the same time. There was literally no personalization, very, very little personalization. And that was because of the way that email technology was built. Responses took a very different approach. And our argument was actually by personalizing and tailoring the content within an email, and building on that with other levels of sophistication, you can actually drive a much better response rate. And the proof was in the pudding. You actually could. Your email campaigns were at their floor during my time, dropped to about sort of 0.5% response rate. And with personalization, certainly in the early days, we were driving a response rate of anywhere up to sort of 10%. So yes, it was more work, but actually the payback was incredibly high. Now, when I joined Responsis, we were in a little office in Thiel. There were 9 of us. And they'd taken a decision to let go the previous salesperson. Wasn't really working. They'd had some success, but it hadn't been sustained. And I was brought in to basically build that out. And over the course of my time during Responsis, we went from very little revenue, sort of well under $500,000, through to the point at which we went public, and then we were acquired by Oracle. And I think at the point at which we were acquired by Oracle, we were over 20% contribution to global revenue. So pretty substantial growth. We were about 150, 180 people across Europe. Not all of those reporting into me, and certainly a lot of hard work by many of my colleagues that got us there. I just happened to be along for the ride, and
I'm sure that's not true. But so, were you the first? Well, you were one of the first salespeople that was hired in Europe. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And
yeah.
then,
So
did you hire people?
Boots on the ground.
Did you hire people underneath you as the team grew?
Yeah. Once my first job was to come in and show that actually we could drive some.
Yeah, had to be some revenue before you can hire people to.
Yeah. Yeah, because the person that was there before me had some success and done a great job, but didn't have that sustained, predictable success. And one of the things I think is really, really important for all of us as individuals, and certainly as sales leaders, is just that regular quarterly cadence. It's very hard to manage a business, although I didn't really appreciate it at the time, but it's really hard to manage a business where you have a brilliant quarter and then an empty quarter, a brilliant quarter and then an okay quarter. It's far better just to get a green light, a green light, a green light, a green light, that steady tick, tick, tick. Predictability breeds confidence.
Particularly in a SaaS business.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
And forgive me, I've worked in SaaS for so long that I forget that there are other business models out there. So yeah, my experience is relevant to SaaS. That's where it is. And of course, with SaaS, the beauty is if you keep your customers and layer on new customers, as long as you don't have that leaky bucket, your revenues grow. And that's why the SaaS model, one of the reasons why the SaaS model has been so successful over the last couple of decades. But for me, yes, I was first boots on the ground. I couldn't have done it without some brilliant colleagues in marketing, colleagues in solutions consulting. But ultimately, it was my job to make sure that we had that predictable revenue, and that we were forecasting that accuracy, because then that built the confidence with the CEO, the CMO, who were sort of overseeing the global side of the business at the time, to then invest and allow me to bring a couple of salespeople in. And then, of course, that takes us into leadership and people and coaching and developing. But yes, did that as first boots on the ground and absolutely loved it.
How long were you purely a sales guy there?
I was selling for just over 10 years before I really got my first formal sales leadership role. I'd done some informal mentoring, sort of helping people, but in terms of being fully responsible with the reporting lines, having to write people's annual reports, that was after about 10 or 11 years of being an individual contributor.
You definitely did your apprenticeship of grinding away at the coalface.
Yeah, but it's look, it's a lot of fun. To this day, I love being out in front of people, talking about their problems, their challenges, and having. I think one of the biggest privileges that I've come to appreciate now is the ability to go into a particular meeting and to bring a perspective that perhaps those individuals hadn't necessarily recognized before. And we did that with the email that I talked about. The perspective was, one size fits all. Instead of doing one campaign a week, let's do 2 or let's do 3. And it's like, well, that's great, but what if there was a better way? What if there was a better way for your company, your colleagues, for your customers, and for you? And what if it looked a bit like this? And for us, it was about personalization. So it wasn't necessarily about increasing the work, but it was about doing more thoughtful work. As I said, to mix things up, in this case, from sort of 0.5% response rate to take it up to 3, 4, 5, and in some cases 10% response rate. And I think that's something that I've always enjoyed, and latterly in my career I've come to look for. I like those disruptive technologies where you have an opportunity to go in and help people understand, well, maybe there is a better way. What you're doing at the moment is great, but maybe there is a better way for you. And I think that to come full circle and kind of high spot, that was ultimately one of the biggest considerations here, was how could I help people like me with something that I've struggled with throughout all of my career, and that's getting my team to quota. How could I help people do a better job at scale of driving attainment, of equipping, training, and coaching people with the skills, the knowledge to be effective, or as effective as they possibly can be in those precious few moments in front of the customer, because we have to work really hard for them. The bar is incredibly high. The amount of information out there that our buyers all have available here is way, way, way greater than it was even 5 years ago. And so getting time with those individuals is so much harder. All the more reason to make sure when you do get that time, you're able to be on the top of your game.
I was watching the Wimbledon final yesterday, men's final. Did you watch it?
I watched some of it. Incredible performance.
Really incredible. And I think you're right. These are the moments as a professional that you have to take advantage of. Novak Djokovic normally takes advantage of those crucial moments at tie breaks, or when you've got advantage over someone in a deuce game. There was one game that went on, I think, for 35 minutes with 18 deuces, which is just amazing. And in the end, it was the young chap, Alcaraz, who came out on top because he took the opportunities that were presented to him just a bit more often than his opponent, which is quite amazing when you think. And of course, these people are all surrounded by coaches and trainers. Yep. This is something, obviously, which is a passionate interest of yours. How do you be the most professional salesperson in a challenging marketplace where people have very little time to give you? And I was wondering, have you seen that change? Do you think that from when you started launching responses back in the day, 20 odd years ago that was, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That we're now competing for less of people's time. They've got less time they're prepared to make available, customers, I mean.
Oh, for sure. And look, you only have to do a cursory search online to see studies from people like Bain and others that will talk about a number of different phenomenon. Phenomenon number one is that there are way more stakeholders. And again, I'm going to talk about B2B sales.
Sure. Those are the people that listen to the podcast. So we're good with that.
Yeah. So, in a B2B decision, there are way more stakeholders on average. It's gone up from 5 to about a dozen typically now. And of course, today's normal doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be tomorrow's normal, because I think one thing that we've learned over the last 5 years is there's no such thing as the new normal, just the next normal. And it's something that my dear friend Roderick Jefferson used as a phrase that I borrowed from him, because I think it's phenomenal. It's like things are always changing. But we're up from 5 to 12. Those individuals now have access to way more information about the products and services that we all sell than ever before. And of course, we're now getting AI that can help them pass that information at another level of granularity. And guess what? Those individuals are being asked way more of by their businesses than they have done in the past. And so the time that they get to spend on making a decision about do they buy your product or your service versus somebody else's is also compressed. There are more of them, they're better informed, and they have way less time to spend with you than at any point in recent history. And so for those of us a little bit like Djokovic and Alcaraz, spending many, many years to build their fitness, to build their skills, to build their mental resilience, to be able to handle that moment, or the almost 5 hours of the match or whatever it was yesterday. The analogy for us as salespeople is that's our moment when we're in front of a customer, whether it's in person, whether it's on a Zoom call or a Teams call, or whether it's in the outreach, right? In those stages where we're putting the phone calls in or sending out an email or a LinkedIn message or whatever it might be. We have to be at the peak of our performance in each of those moments. And just like Alcaraz and Djokovic and all the other great athletes in the world, that takes deliberate practice over many, many years. And part of that is having a coach. Part of that is being deliberate about the own efforts you make every single day, every single week, putting time aside to get better. Part of that is having mentors around you. But the biggest part of that is just consistency. It's just doing a little bit every single day to get just a little bit better. And I think the analogy is there for top athletes, and it applies wholly to those of us that choose sales as a career.
And thinking back again to your opportunities of scaling sales teams, what was the next one you did after responses?
Where did I go after that? Well, we were acquired into Oracle. Right. So whilst I didn't interview for that job, that was a very different world. I went from a company of, we were about 1,000 people-ish, a few $100 million of revenue, into a company. Oracle at the time was about 150,000 people globally. And so, that was a very different situation, a very different job. We were what they call a co-prime or an overlay sales team within the Oracle Marketing Cloud. We were an overlay sales team to the CX team. And the skill set there was wholly different. We had to work with and alongside our CX colleagues. So what kept me entertained and engaged there for 2 years and 9 months, funny how you remember certain facts. And I know I was at Oracle 2 years and 9 months, was influencing different sales leaders across all the different CX teams, the UK team, which at the time was led by Mark Newton, Laurent, who led the team in France. And of course, that internal network was a way of unlocking the gateway through to the wider Oracle customer portfolio, which ultimately led to us being able to maximize our revenues. So I went from responses, although I was still kind of selling the same thing. I went to selling it within a very different organization. And then over time, we also went from being a single product company to selling a portfolio of products, which again was a really fascinating experience. As a salesperson going through that, when you've got a hammer, everything kind of looks like a nail, right? But when you got a toolkit, it's like, okay, do I need the hammer for this? Or actually, do I need the screwdriver? If I need the screwdriver, do I need the flathead or the Phillips or whatever it might be, right? And I think that was a really big challenge in terms of how did we equip our people to adopt new products and to have different value proposition or value conversations with different personas. And how did we give them, a big part of that, I always think, is about giving salespeople the confidence to have an engaging conversation, because if you don't have the confidence, you're probably not going to have the conversation.
Yeah, I agree completely. A lot of selling is about having the right mindset, isn't it?
Yes, for sure.
I think a lot of success in life is about having the right mindset. After Oracle, then, did you do another land and expand?
So I did a land and expand with a company called Yext. We went from revenues there of literally a few tens of thousands of dollars. Did that for a couple of years, and we took the team through. So again, I was the sort of we had one salesperson. I remember him to this day, Rory Stern, brilliant salesperson. We built that motion out in Northern Europe, and we took it to the better part of almost a dozen salespeople, and through to sort of $6, $7, $8 million worth of ARR of revenue. So yeah, I've done that a few times, and then most immediately prior to HighSpot, I joined DocuSign to lead a bit of a reboot on their enterprise business in EMEA. Interesting connection there. The CEO at Responsys was CEO at DocuSign at that point. And I was asked to come back in and basically reboot or reset the enterprise motion, because again, it wasn't delivering the predictable, sustainable revenues that the company needed. And so if you sort of went back over all of my roles in LinkedIn, I think you'd see a common factor. It's either it's some sort of build out or reset. In the case of DocuSign, it's the same sort of motion, and you'd see it within disruptive technologies. And
what is it that appeals to you about that? That's what I'm not quite clear on. I'm interested in your motivation to do that and take that approach.
I think it's about I like to I like to be able to I think explore that, the challenge of going into different markets. Perhaps in the Nordics, for example, you might want to do a joint venture, versus put people on the ground. I've done both, seen both sides of that. So for me, I think it's the mental stimulation. I like to build. I like to build what I hope other people would look back on and say were effective teams, highly effective, whatever others people will judge that. But I like to build those teams. I like to create the culture where people can perform at their highest capability. And not everybody's going to play a Wimbledon final, but actually, playing on the county circuit or the club circuit, doesn't matter what the level is. If you turn up and you do your best, you'll get a lot of joy from it. You'll get a lot of reward. And I think sales is a similar thing. And no CRO or sales leader that I've ever spoken to has ever had a team of pure A players. And I think it's a bit of a misnomer. I think every team needs to be balanced with individuals. And every individual, we've got to work hard to understand what their strengths are. And as I've talked about before, breaking it down and thinking, what do I need to equip these people with? What do I need to train them on? What do I need to coach them on? And guess what? Coaching's free. The only cost there is time. And I think if you break it down into that, what I've seen is the ability to help everybody take a step up and to the right. And if everybody takes a step up and to the right and everybody improves their attainment 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 percentage points, the impact over scale for an organization doing that is millions of dollars. It's absolutely millions of dollars. And this is one of the most common misnomers that I see is people is like, oh, I just need more top performers, or I just need to do, I just need to sort out these lower performers. The secret for success as a sales leader, whether you're in a land and expand, like we talked about with some of my experiences, or whether you're in a very large organization, is that bulk of the bell curve in the middle. And if you can help those people in that area who typically are smart, who are motivated, but who haven't just quite figured out what to say in those precious moments, quite how to handle themselves, how to land that value proposition. If you can help equip, train, and coach them to perform, then you see that whole bell curve move to the right. And because of the volume of the people you've got there, you've got a magnifying impact. So everybody's doing another $10,000. Well, you got 50 people doing that. Huge impact on the organization. So I think for me, Kevin, it's about the intellectual challenge. It's about building, and a big central core part of that are the people that I get to work with.
And that's for sure one of the great joys of working in sales.
Absolutely.
It's the people you work with, isn't it? I remember watching, because I think are you a bit of a sports fan? You look like you're a bit of a sports fan.
A little bit of rugby.
A bit of rugby. Have you seen the movie Any Given Sunday?
I have not.
Great film. There's a couple of good coaching moments in that. It's about the last season of an aging star quarterback in an American football team. He's played by Dennis Quaid. It's an old film. It's like 30 years, maybe more than that old. Al Pacino plays the coach in the team. It's brilliant, a brilliant movie. And a TV reporter's asking Dennis Quaid what he's going to miss when he stops playing American football. And you're expecting him to say, well, it's the crowd roaring when I make that touchdown or whatever, right? Those sort of moments of his own individual excellence. And he said, that's something that's always stayed with me. He said, it's looking back across all the line of players behind me, the whole team, knowing we're moving forward in the same direction together. Yeah. That's lovely, isn't it?
It is, and that's particularly powerful for me because if you remember where I started my career was in the military, and I started my career in the military in Northern Ireland, and there were some bad things happening in Northern Ireland now, and I think the society there, thank God, has come a long way since then. But the one thing that has always struck me, and I think this is actually unconsciously is something that I'm drawn to, is that feeling of camaraderie, is that absolute necessity to be able to trust people, in that case in Northern Ireland, with your life, and them to trust you with theirs, because it was real, and we had to watch each other's backs. And I think in some way, this is curious, and I hadn't really thought about it until you mentioned it, camaraderie that I see across and within the highest performing go-to-market teams is something that I'm inherently drawn to. And as a leader, if you were to, if you'd sort of be a fly on the wall in our office, in our leadership team meetings, in our all hands meetings, if you were to speak to those people that I work with now, I hope what you would hear and see is a palpable and daily commitment to the culture that we have at HighSpot. And how do we create an environment where people feel psychologically safe, where they can bring their whole selves to work, and where they are supported to continue to grow on their career and through their career, whether it's through us and with us, which hopefully in many cases it will be, or on those occasions when there isn't a path with us, at least people go on to work for another company in a bigger and better role, whatever bigger and better might mean for them. And for me as a leader, that's a big part of success. And I think, were you to ask me what would I miss, what will I miss when I retire, because hopefully one day I will, it will be around seeing individuals develop over time and the opportunities that gives them in their lives. And I remember one of the chaps that I worked with at Responsys, then at Yext, and he's now at another company. He interviewed at Responsys, joined us as an SDR, BDR, then promoted a number of years later to be a junior salesperson. When we worked together at Yext, he was a senior enterprise seller at that point. And then he moved from that role into a leadership role. And he currently has over 100 salespeople worldwide as a third line leader. And and just seeing the trajectory of somebody like that, it's just one example. There are others as well. And look, I'm not trying to kid myself that I was anything other than a small catalyst in that. But being just a catalyst in that person being able to develop the skills over time to pursue that career and for that career to have such an impact on that individual's lives, that's what I'll miss the most. Seeing the development of individuals.
What's the one thing that you wish you knew at the beginning of your career?
The one thing that I wish I knew that I would encourage everybody that's listening to put at the top of their list, maybe get a pen, paper, and write this down, is the most important thing you can do in your career is to choose your manager. And never, ever, ever compromise on that. Choose a manager that is going to invest in you, that can show a track record of doing so within their current role, within their current people, and work with them to get them to be an active part in you growing your career. Now, they're never going to replace your own skills, your own curiosity, your own learning, but they are going to complement it. And I would, if I was to go back, 20 or 30 years to when I would and speak to myself getting my first career or my first civilian role, that is what I would tell myself. And I wish I knew it then. Now, I've learned some stuff from managers that I'm happy to no longer work with, but I just wish I'd had the foresight to understand actually the manager has way more impact on the success in my role than perhaps the company or the product.
Well, according to Gallup, the manager has 70% of the responsibility for improvements in team performance. So it accounts for 70% of the variability in team performance, which is a huge, huge chunk. Andy, it's been a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolute pleasure.